At first, I was really never interested in trying any of those dating apps, like Tinder or Plenty of Fish. But eventually, I gave in and created an account for myself. The first thing that I noticed right away was the amount of clearly fake accounts on the website that were made to look like celebrities or models. However, after spending some time scrolling through the endless sea of profiles made for people that I may or may not match up with, I finally found a few people that seemed interesting to me, and more importantly, they seemed like real accounts. Now, typically, I'm an introverted person, and I'm not the type of person to message someone out of the blue to strike up a conversation. But that's what the website and apps like those are made for. So I sent out a message to someone whose name was supposedly Kara. The first thing that I said to her was a reference to Supergirl, considering they shared the same name. And honestly, I feel like it was a good icebreaker because we immediately fell into a long conversation. And after a bit of awkward small talk, the two of us got to know one another a little bit better. That being said, I still never had met this woman, so I certainly was wary about the sort of information I would give out. For instance, she was very open about where she lived. I didn't feel that comfortable yet, so I simply told her about the area I had grown up in. If the two of us had actually ended up going on a date, then I would have told her where I lived, but not until meeting her first. Though, if I'm being honest, it never really got to that point. And shortly after talking to Kara, I was turned away from dating sites forever. You see, everything started to change about a week and a half after we started talking. The two of us had planned to meet up multiple times, but for some reason, she always had something come up and had to cancel. This was a bit of a red flag for me because it made me think that she may not be a real person. And then one day I asked her about it. I try not to be rude, so in a message I simply said to her, "Hey Kara, I hope this doesn't come off as too forward or rude, but I was just wondering if there was another reason why you wouldn't want to meet me in person." Now I was expecting her to be a bit defensive with this response, but I wasn't expecting an explosion. She went on a very long rant about how I should feel lucky that she was even talking to me, and things of that nature. I tried to apologize, but she wasn't having it at all, which is when things got really creepy. I stopped responding to her, hoping that it would give her time to cool off, when she messages me, "I'm coming over," which I thought was strange considering I hadn't given her my address or anything. But before I could respond, she sent me another message that said, "I'm 20 minutes away from you." And then she said the name of the street that I lived on. At this point, I was pretty freaked out because again, I had never told her where my house was located. I responded as quickly as I could, asking her how she could have known the name of my street. Kara told me not to worry about it and said, "I know all that I need to know about you." And at that point, I decided enough was enough. I told her not to show up at my house, and then I deleted my Plenty of Fish account. Sadly, it was too late. About 20 minutes after deleting my account, I was trying to calm myself down and convince myself that it was just an internet troll and nothing to worry about. That was when I heard the sound of a car honking in my driveway. My eyes widened and I made my way over to the window, and sitting in my driveway was a dark blue Honda SUV with the windows too tinted to see who was inside. The driver of the car continued to honk, and at this point, I wasn't feeling safe in my own home, so I called the police. The person in the Honda sat in my driveway honking for nearly 10 minutes before the police arrived, and when they did, I was very happy that I hadn't gone outside on my own. It turned out that Kara never existed in the first place, and instead, I was talking to a man who appeared to be in his 50s. After talking to the police, they discovered that he wasn't all there, mentally. In other words, he had mental issues that required him to be medicated. However, he hadn't been taking his medication and thought that he had genuinely connected with me. When he was asked how he knew my address, he claimed that he was able to hire someone to run a background check on me, which ended up giving him my home address and who knows what other information. I felt bad, but I had no choice other than to file a restraining order against the man. After spending some time on Tinder, I ended up matching with this guy that I had gone to school with a few years ago, and right away, we ended up messaging each other back and forth. The two of us began to reminisce about high school and a few of the classes that we had together. It was a really nice conversation, and I really wasn't sure why the two of us never clicked like this before in the past. We kept talking for a few weeks, and throughout the course of that time, he kept asking me if I wanted to grab some dinner. I had to turn him down each time, not because I didn't want to go, but simply because my work schedule was too hectic over the course of those weeks. I could tell that he was getting a bit upset each time I would say that I couldn't go out. But finally, our schedules lined up and I was able to say yes when he asked me to go see a movie with him. It was very exciting at first. It'd been a long time since I had gone on a date. Plus, it was with someone that I already knew, so it wouldn't be super awkward at first. I quickly started to get the creeps once I was around him though, after our first interaction. Look, I'm a hugger, so giving someone a hug is no problem. But when we first saw each other, his hug lingered for a minute, and that alone wouldn't have been a problem, except for the fact that I could feel him nuzzling his nose into my head and smelling my hair. I tried to act casually as I pulled away from him and began making small talk about the movie, and shortly after we were both making our way into the mall and then into the theater. Things started to return to normal as we watched the movie, and I wasn't feeling as tense anymore. That is, until he put his hand on my leg. I didn't like that, so I very calmly picked up his hand and put it back on his side of the seat, and simply said, "I'm sorry. I'm just not quite comfortable with that yet." Now, I knew he wasn't going to like hearing that, but it is what it is. He needed to respect my boundaries, and I was being as respectful as I possibly could. That was when I heard him let out a sigh and said, "This is ridiculous." I didn't want to cause a stir and ruin the movie for all the other patrons around us, so instead of saying something, I simply decided that the date was over. I got up, told him that I'm sorry and that I had to leave, and proceeded to walk out to my car. We had only been in the theater for about 30 minutes, but by that point the sun had gone down and the parking lot was only illuminated by the street lights that were placed around through it. As I walked outside, I noticed that the parking lot was relatively empty, with only a few other cars around aside from mine. I quickly spotted my car and began walking toward it. As I pulled the key fob out and unlocked the door, that was when I heard a sound coming from behind me. It was the sound of someone slowly jogging toward me. I turned around and was really freaked out when I saw the guy that I had just left in the theater chasing after me. But it wasn't like he was running over to apologize to me. I could tell by the look in his eyes and the red on his face that he was coming over to yell at me. I didn't waste any time, especially since I didn't have anyone around me to help me. So I began running away from him and toward my car. That was when the sound of his footsteps got louder and sounded as if he sped up. I made it to my car just in time and locked the door as I jumped inside. I couldn't even get my key into the ignition by the time he was at the driver's side door. I could hear him pulling at the handle as I tried to get the key into the ignition. As soon as the car started, he began slamming his fist into the window of my driver's side door and screaming. I could hear him yelling, "Hey!" and asking me where I thought I was going. I did my best to keep my composure as I put the car into drive and began pulling out of the spot that I had been parked in. I could hear him continuing to bang on the side of the car as I passed by him. The sound of him yelling slowly faded in the distance as I continued to drive away. Once I knew I was safe from him, I found a spot to park my car and let it all out. I called my cousin and told him what had just happened. He let me go to his house since he lived closer to the movie theater, and he spent the rest of the night helping me relax. I ended up deleting Tinder from my phone because it turns out even the people you know can be total creeps. Do you know how everyone warns about meeting up with people you meet online? Well, I used to laugh at people for saying that, but I learned the hard way how dangerous it can be to meet a stranger that you've only talked to online. It all began when I started talking to this girl named Christina on this website, Meet Me, and we both appeared to hit it off right away. She seemed like a very charismatic girl, and the two of us were both into the same type of music. And eventually, after talking for a few days, the two of us decided to meet up that upcoming Saturday. The plan was for us to walk around town, maybe go hang out at a park and then grab a bite to eat. I saved my allowance that week to make sure that I had enough money to pay for both of us to grab some pizza, but it ended up never coming to that. I had my mom drop me off in town and told her that I was meeting up with some friends from school. Unbeknownst to her, I had never met Christina before, but she didn't question me too much about it and dropped me off at the ice cream stand that was located at the edge of town. It was there that I waited for my date to show up. I waited for about 20 minutes beyond the time that she was supposed to meet me there, but eventually, I resorted to texting her. All I said was, "Hey, I'm here. Let me know when you're close." It only took her about a minute to respond, and she told me that she was actually already at the park. I was a little bummed out because now I had to walk by myself, but I told her to sit tight and that I would be right there. But when I got to the park, I was surprised to find that it was almost empty. The only people there were the three guys that seemed to be in their 20s or 30s sitting at one of the picnic tables. I walked right past them and continued to look around for Christina, but when I couldn't find her, I decided to go sit on the swings and send her a message. This time, there was no reply from her. Instead, I was approached by the three men. I'm sure they could tell that I was uneasy when they came up to me, but still, they tried to introduce themselves. And when I told them that I was waiting for someone, they said something that I never would have expected. "We know." It was then that I realized that Christina wasn't coming to the park that day. The three men could tell that I was getting freaked out, and they began to chuckle among themselves. I got up and tried to walk away, but they simply stepped in front of me and blocked my path. I said, "Excuse me, guys," and hoped they would step aside, but they didn't. They asked me what my hurry was and why I was in such a rush. At that point, I was feeling really uneasy and was just at the point of panicking when, thankfully, I saw a police car driving by. I did the only thing I could think of doing. I began yelling for help and waving my arms around, which ended up taking the men by surprise and actually caused them to take a step back. The police officer ended up seeing me and pulled into the park with her lights on. The three guys all took off in a different direction as the police officer began making her way over to us. She said something into her radio as she came up to me and asked me if I was okay. I explained to her what had just happened, and she told me she was going to get a hold of my mom to pick me up. I knew that I was going to get into trouble once my parents found out what happened and that I was talking to strangers. But in the end, I was just happy to be out of that situation.